Hi everyone, welcome back to Class 101. Bryce Coe here, and today we start Chapter 2. Chapter 2 will be all about building off of that understanding of 3D form that we focused on in Chapter 1, and using ink as an opportunity to make every line that we draw convey those 3D shapes. So today we'll be going over the various types of line quality that exist and how to recognize when to draw certain types of lines. Okay, so let's look at our materials for today. Basically, we are busting out all of the Kuretake Bros, except for the brush pen one, and you can know that that's the brush pen one because it's got 4 characters on the side here. The rest of them, and the ones that we'll be using today, only have 2 each. So you guys have already used the fine and extra fine. You guys have already used the fine and medium, but today we're going to be using the extra fine as well. The extra fine has a tip like that. It's kind of got like a gray and then black tip that's super fine at the tip, and it's got a symbol that looks like this. Next we have the fine, which you guys have already used, but it's got a tip that's getting a little bit thicker. Then our most used brush, the medium tip, getting a bit chunkier there. And lastly, for the first time, we'll get to use the broad tipped pen. And he's got a really fat felt tip there. Can get a lot of different angles with that. So cool. So those are the materials that we'll be using today. And the first thing that I'd like to talk about is something called line weight. So I'll just write that at the top here. And line weight basically means line thickness. And there's a lot of different reasons that you want to vary your line weight, but let's first just get a feel for our pens by drawing a line with each of them so we can compare what the different line weight you can achieve will be with each pen. So first let's write down what they are. So we have extra fine, and we'll just draw a line across. Doesn't need to be too pretty. But do remember that when you use these pens to have a lighter grip and not to be too tense when you draw the line. That way you can get a smooth line going all the way across. You want your arm to be moving, not just your wrist. Next we have the fine tip. Just draw a smooth line all the way across, moving our arm. Third, we have the medium tip. And lastly, we have the broad tip. Wow, look how much thicker that guy is. Okay, so, nothing too surprising here. The pens, as advertised, have different line thickness. But why do you want to differentiate your line weight when you're drawing? What's the purpose and when is it most effective? That's what we're going to try to talk about today. So it might already be obvious from this, but a broad line or thicker line kind of just has more presence and stands out more than an extra fine line. And one of the ways that you can use this to effect is to create the illusion of distance. So I'm going to do another example with these by drawing our old friend, the box. So I'm just going to try to draw a box with each of these pens about the same size. And the purpose of us drawing this is just to kind of illustrate how this box really kind of like comes to the forefront versus this one. It's kind of a gradient of this feeling less important and maybe further away than as we go over here, and then feeling more in our face, more up close. And if you structure your drawing so that objects that are closer to the viewer are drawn with a thicker line weight, that can make the distance between things that were drawn with a thinner line weight even greater to make them feel further apart from each other. So if we do the same example with like some characters here, and try to drawing them the same size. It will almost feel like they're going into the distance. Very happy group here. It's almost like the volume is gradually getting turned up here. So that's kind of the most obvious and maybe most practical use of line weight when you're deciding to switch between pens. The other thing that we can do with line weight is to distinguish the quality of what we're trying to portray and like the prominence. So I'll try to do an example over here. Doing my best to stick with just the contour with the broad pen, and then as I go into some of these more minor forms like the hair, switching down to a thinner line weight just to show that these other things that we're drawing are not as dominant as forms than things drawn with a thicker line weight. Switching down to the fine. So like the pocket on the shirt, or like some of these buttons, are more like details, and choosing to draw details exclusively with a thinner line weight can kind of just show that they're laying on top of the stronger forms that are drawn with the thicker line weight. And going into super fine details, like you know, let's say this guy's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, that these aren't like plants or flowers or leaves that are laying on him literally, but they're actually just part of the shirt. You might make that out from context, but choosing to differentiate the line quality with a thinner line weight is just another way to make that more clear, and might be something that you like aesthetically. Pretty much everything that we're going to talk about today is just giving you tools to understand the vocabulary of what you can do with lines, and then you making choices on how to manipulate those things or kind of create your own like language of of how those things play in your drawing will be the sort of decisions that will give you a style that's unique. So yeah, if you're someone who really likes texture and details and patterns on things, highlighting them by always choosing a certain line weight to distinguish them is one way to make them stand out. So if I had drawn everything here with the same line weight, these details might kind of overwhelm the viewer, or maybe not stand out in the same way that they do, because now they're more delicate and they kind of have a unique feeling from the other elements on the drawing. So that's line weight. Let's move on to the next characteristic of line. Okay, so now let's talk about something called stroke length. And stroke length is a very simple concept. It's just the distance that a line travels, but it's another attribute of line that we can use to create a unique effect in a drawing. So just to describe the different types of stroke length, I'm just going to write them out here. And I have switched to a fine tip. So an unbroken line, basically what we did on the previous page, where it's just as continuous as possible. Then there's a broken line, where it just kind of has a break every now and then. And lastly, we have dashes or dots, and they're just really short strokes, or even really small dots. So generally speaking, the reason that you want to have a kind of clear delineation between these types is so that you're also able to clarify what's happening in your drawing in terms of what's a form, what's a texture, what's a detail. And then broken line is most effective when you reserve it to convey contours, so the outline of the major shapes, versus a broken line. Actually, before we do that, let's get to it. Let's do an example over here. So just going to draw a cylinder, but with a little bit of a bump here, because it's actually a can. Very fat can. Okay, so doing a mostly unbroken line here to convey the contour of the can helps to solidify this as the major form, versus when I use broken lines next for cross contours. And for cross contours, we'll do things like highlighting the fact that this little rim at the top here is, it's not like a harsh edge that is here. It's a smooth gradation, but that there is kind of that lip that is more straight here. And maybe the same thing at the bottom. And on the inside of this rim here too. One of the more contoured shapes might be just the little tag thing here. But then these forms here that this, this part that kind of breaks in, maybe I'll do broken lines for that part. And lastly, the dashes or dots. This is most useful for accents or texture. And a use case for that might be that on this area of the can where we have a lot of white space, it might kind of lose the form. So to strengthen it, just make it a little bit more clear, you might do dashes to strengthen the form and to just fill in that space so that the viewer knows that this thing is curved all the way across. Details that go on the inside of this can, you might use unbroken lines, but one way to make it even more clear that they are more of a texture shape is by moving down to a thinner line weight. Sort of just distinguish them as not conveying form, but just being details that lie on top of the form. Okay, so one of the things I want to mention is, drawing an unbroken line versus a broken line, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to draw it perfectly unbroken at first. It might just mean that you connect any mistakes that you made or any breaks in the line to make sure that it's clear that the form primarily is unbroken, and that cross contours that just are defining subtleties in that form are with the cross contour broken line, and lastly that dashes or dots are just accents to kind of maybe fill in large white space or to just strengthen and emphasize form. So let's do one more example over here. So when I'm drawing a character, I often draw in unbroken lines because I don't know exactly what the character is doing or like where everything is. So drawing with unbroken lines is often a good idea when you want to figure that out. Or if, like, for example here, like maybe you decided afterwards that you wanted to put, like, I don't know, some kind of hat on top. So leaving space for yourself to add things, I think it's totally fine to draw with broken lines, but that still means that you should go back, and once you understand that the form is there, that you want to close off those lines to make it clear that, it's not like a empty spot in the head or that there's a hole or something. So I'm going to mostly try to draw the contour shapes here. And one of the things that some people have maybe noticed in my artwork as well is when I'm drawing, like for figure drawing or something, that I might often just leave a side of a character completely undrawn. I might just draw one part of a line. I think that the reason why that works sometimes is because if the form is strong enough on one side of it that it implies, like the bottom part of this leg, for example, that that's what a really strong unbroken line can do. It can basically be strong enough of conveying shape that you don't even need to follow a strict rule of like everything is closed off and using this exacting kind of structure for drawing. But the reason why it's helpful to understand these concepts is that having a clear language for how you portray different things will just give your drawing a sort of consistency that will make the things that you're drawing easier to understand. Okay, so now that I've drawn most of the contours here, going in and finishing off these lines to make them unbroken, kind of like will solidify that these are the forms. And then if I want to go in with cross contours, like I kind of have some broken lines here with the hair. That's because the end of the hair here is not like a solid form. It's actually like a bunch of thin hair. But then kind of like a cross contour on the shoulder or here to kind of like show the waviness of the material. Likewise, I'll continue to kind of add accents where maybe not much is happening with the form, but I want to just suggest more, like the curve here of like the butt or of the creases here, and where the pants is having ridges that come up because of that bend. And so when I draw something, I might often need to, after everything is finished, go in and complete lines, because I wasn't sure, and there's a lot of broken lines that are just hanging, where I was kind of maybe thinking I might add something, or just need to clarify a form. So don't worry about having perfect unbroken lines at first. Use broken lines initially to help plan out what you're drawing, and then use dashes to just emphasize form. Okay, so that is stroke length, and now let's move on to the last concept we're going to talk about today. It's something called rhythm. And rhythm is also a very simple concept to understand at first. It's basically just the density of line. And I'm going to switch to a thinner pen just to make this a little bit easier. Let's go with the fine tip. So I'll start out with a really slow rhythm. Something really slow might be something like this, where these lines have sort of the same direction, and that kind of might tie them together, but they're still relatively farther apart, versus a more medium rhythm. The lines are closer together. The closeness of the line can just really help to strengthen the form. They don't necessarily need to be all short like this. I'm just doing that because otherwise it'd take forever. And lastly, a really fast or tight rhythm where the lines are so close together that they can essentially be shading. So you can think of these three types of rhythm, as in slow, medium, and fast, as being somewhat of the palette that I personally use when I'm drawing, and your palette doesn't need to be exactly the same. But the reason that I want to have these three distinct ways of understanding my rhythm is because then I can have a clear use case for when I decide to use one. For example, I'm going to draw a variety of characters here with some hair that will use different types of rhythm. So a character with really slow rhythmed hair. Even though it's largely using this kind of slower rhythm, if I decide that within the language of my drawing style that I want to use a faster rhythm to kind of portray the inside part of the hair, something that's like maybe in shadow. So like the lit part is using a slow rhythm versus the shadow unlit part uses a faster rhythm. Okay, next I'm going to draw a character that has primarily more of a medium-sized rhythm, and I think the effect of having such a intense rhythm is that the clarity of form gets a little bit more jumbled. It's like messier, and that messiness might be exactly what you want your character to have as far as their personality. So like more disheveled hair might mean that you need to show the hair going every which way, in which case having lots of lines to kind of create and mirror that character might be an effective choice. So I might still choose to have a thicker density, faster rhythm here on the edges, where maybe it's lit from the top and the sides of the head are more dark. Third, I'm going to do an example here with a tighter rhythm, but I'll also show you that you can use a variation of rhythm, kind of like I did here actually, to convey form as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with kind of a slower rhythm on the side, and then just gradually get more and more intense until it's basically solid. I'm going to try to mirror that here. And the density going from slow to fast here kind of helps to show the shape here of the hair getting basically thinner and then thicker. Very common sense idea, but it's one that you can use in your own drawing to strengthen the form or clarity of what's going on. Similarly, you could use rhythm as a way to shade overall. So with like a bald character, if you want to show the shape of the head like that it's more round, then what you could do is as it gets closer to the edge here where the turn is the strongest, you can make that the most dense, versus maybe in the middle where that hair is most flat towards the viewer. And then again, as it gets closer to the edge where it's turning away, you might make that more thick. And this kind of gets into another idea here, which you probably almost never see me do, but it's something called cross-hatching. And cross-hatching is a way to use rhythm in a much more dense way than I normally draw, where you're gonna use lines following a form. So let me just do a quick example here. But you know how we talk about cross contours or accents kind of following the shape of a form? Well, you can see how sometimes with other art styles that use cross-hatching, that they might see that the form also goes this way and then kind of overlap those lines as well. So it's a much more dense way to think of rendering, and using lots of line to convey the light and the shadow and all the subtleties of a form. But personally, it's not really within the wheelhouse of lines that are as thick as these. I feel like you could probably more effectively use this kind of style if you stick to the really thin line weight that maybe you can get from the extra fine pen. So for example, if the cheek's going down this way, but then it's kind of like also got more of an angle, then that's like kind of in a nutshell what's happening with cross-hatching. If you want to go into that sort of style, that's just one of the ways that you can combine the different characteristics of line quality to define your own way of rendering. The point of this lesson is to give you all of these tools so that you have the ability to play with these attributes, and the decisions that you come to combine these things in the way that you like is going to be one of the big things that defines your own style. So that's pretty much the lesson. To recap, we went over the three main qualities of line weight, stroke length, and rhythm. And hopefully that was just helpful to, again, emphasize what's possible with your line work. And the mission for today is very simple. Please just turn in the practice that we did together. For the next class, I'll be showing you how I think about line quality when I'm drawing, and we'll do a practical example together. It should be a very helpful lesson on how to leverage what we learned today, and I look forward to sharing it with you. So until the next class, see ya.